Starting again, Mr. Cowden, you just want me to start? Wait, just send me a chat. Okay. Hello, you've tuned in this week's episode of Next Steps Forward, and I'm your host, Chris Meek. As always, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Next Steps Forward is committed to helping others achieve more than ever while experiencing greater personal empowerment and well-being. Our guest today is Charles Bender III. Charles is the founding CEO and a board member of Place of Hope, which is a Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, faith-based and state-licensed family-style residential child caring agency for abused and neglected children. Charles had many years of work with various housing, social, and human services organizations throughout Palm Beach County before launching Place of Hope in 1999. The majority of Charles' work has involved low-income individuals and families, homeless and substance abusing populations, and at-risk dependent children and youth. Charles Bender, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It's exciting. Appreciate it.
No, I appreciate your time and certainly appreciate the work that you're doing. So Charles, let's start off. What inspired you to dedicate your career to helping vulnerable children and families?
Well, there was a longer story, but when I came to Place of Hope, well, I guess in college before Place of Hope, I really felt like I wanted to be in the lack of a better term, the people helping business. I wanted to do something with purpose. I wanted to do something to help people out, but I'm not really much of a social worker. I'm more of a social entrepreneur. And so I did a few things out there that were great, and I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. Learned what I didn't like as well. But when I had the opportunity to kind of co-launch Place of Hope, for me, that became really a spiritual calling for me. So it was a large church in the area, Christ Fellowship, that actually had the idea and the launching, and then they selected me to be their lead guy on a committee for a lot of years to just kind of shape it. And then one day the board was formed and they hired me, and here I am 25 years later.
Be careful what you wish for, right?
Right.
So we all benefit from mentors and role models. Tell us about the people who influenced your thinking or mentored you along the journey to helping others.
I'd say, so much of it goes back to my parents, and it has to do with the way I like to help people. Like I said, I'm not a great social worker. I'm probably not the most patient guy on the planet. I have a certain set of values that I go by. Excuse me. And I feel like, there's ways to get ahead and certain principles to live by. And so my approach was oftentimes different than what's typically out there in the human services world. But I would say my parents, excuse me, I think my parents had a lot to do with it. They were both small business entrepreneurs, and I just learned a lot about work ethic and launching things and sticking with it, working outside the 9 to 5, all those kinds of things. And that's what it took to get this thing off the ground. Not just me, there were other great people as well. But yeah, I'd say, and there's been great mentors ever since, board members, donors who are involved, people who just help take it to the next level. A lot of them, even to this day. So there's quite a few.
You worked for many years with various organizations dedicated to helping others. What inspired you to start Place of Hope instead of continue to do what you were doing?
Yeah, I was working when the opportunity came to help the church. And it was volunteer based. So I actually did that for a little over 4 years while it was just a planning cycle before the church spun us off separately as a nonprofit. We bought land and then kind of envisioned where we were going, how we were going to do it, getting state licensure, raising money, all of it. So I would say, it was the folks that really had the original vision that really encouraged me. And then just seeing how people, and I see this to this day, and it's actually one of my favorite things about what we do. And that is that people step up and go way beyond themselves to help in so many ways. And it could be little kids with a lemonade stand, or it could be somebody who can pay to build a building. It really doesn't matter. It's just that we see such greatness out of people, and it just completely keeps me pumped up for what we do.
Now, you talked about volunteering for the church before you were spun off. Was there a specific moment or an experience that prompted you to say, I'm going to do this?
So the board was formed, and they came to me and said, we want you to run this after these years. And I thought, I had a career going in something else. Thought I had, great opportunity. And I thought, I don't really want to do that because I ran homeless shelters before, and I've had some really crazy stories. And I thought, 24/7 care of having people in your residential care is a lot. So I said, look, we need an answer out of you in a week. And I said, well, I can't give that to you in a week. I need to go home. I need to pray about it. I need to talk to my wife. And I just need to really think this through. And there was actually a day about 30 days later, and one of the board members called kind of impatient, like, hey, we need an answer. And I said, "Well, I'm just not there yet." And it was literally like a day later. My wife came to me, and we had both that day separately felt like God was telling us go do it. So that's why I say, the spiritual thing, and then the timing of that was just amazing. And to be honest with you, there's been some tough days, but man, I can't envision doing something else with my life all these years.
There's an old saying, do what you love and call it work.
Exactly. No, it's
That,
true.
that's fantastic. So let's take a step back so we have a better understanding of your community and the people who live there. Now, I'm sure when some people hear Palm Beach Gardens, they logically think of mansions along the beach and the super rich people who live in them.
hmm
Describe Palm Beach Gardens and why there's even a need for housing, social, and human services organizations.
Well, interestingly, we're regional now. We have a campus in Boca Raton, so I'm sure you've heard the same things about Boca Raton. We have one in West Palm Beach, directly off of the island of Palm Beach, and we have two in Palm Beach Gardens, and now one in Martin County, one county north of here. Which everything you just described is true about all those communities. There's so much wealth here. There is so much prosperity. There's so many people doing great things. It's getting more by the day down here, as you know. But we also have a huge divide in this community in terms of not that all socioeconomic things drive abuse to children, because they don't, because we see stories coming out of every neighborhood you can imagine, but there is a tremendous amount of poverty here, and it's really hard to make it. And when you factor those things into lifestyle and stress and the other things, oftentimes these poor kids are in the way. And so I don't think people really realize, like you just described, what just a community just minutes from here or 30 miles west of here, what it looks like, and how people are living, and the things that are taking place to kids that should never take place.
You launched Place of Hope in 1999. When did you have your very first vision of Place of Hope, and what did it take for you to get started?
So I can't take credit for that. That was Christ Fellowship Church. The pastor and his wife, they had come back from a trip to Romania. They were there during war-torn Romania when they had stopped U.S. families from being able to adopt. They were warehousing these kids in these horrific hospital-type scenarios. These kids were not growing in their developmental steps, etc. But while they were there, they saw another group from the States in a much smaller, home-like, faith-based, family-friendly environment where the kids really were a focus. And they felt that God put it on their hearts to come back to the States, figure out what the heck's going on down here, because it was bad at the time here. That was, like you said, that was 94, 5, 6, 7, 8. And we hit the road saying, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And we're going to do it with excellence, or we're just not going to do it at all. And I remember them saying that to me. And so I caught the vision as a result of the vision they had. They had, and then they needed a front guy to go do it. So and I've built an amazing team since that day. Most of my key people have been with me over 20 years. So.
And what did Place of Hope look like at the end of its first year?
We had a couple homes on one of, we now have 5 campus locations. We also do statewide programmings. We do a lot of different things, but from the residential perspective, it was 10-acre campus here in Palm Beach Gardens, a beautiful place, but we had to grow slow because we needed to learn what the heck we were doing. Honestly, I mean, these are kids that come from the worst scenarios by far. I always say in today's day and age, they wouldn't like this if I said it out loud to them, but it's the truth. The Department of Children and Families in any state does not want to remove kids. So they will go out of their way to, redefine things and what's an acceptable level of what takes place in these poor kids' lives. So by the time we get them, it's a mess. It's really, really, really tough. But we started seeing these kids heal up fast, really find a trajectory for their lives and find hope. And by the way, it wasn't rocket science. It was really just a traditional organic family model with all the kind of accoutrements that go with it. A nice place to live, chores, going places on weekends, playing after school sports, all that stuff, and having it in a family milieu. And it just works fantastically. So.
And that's amazing. What were some of your biggest challenges early on in growing Place of Hope?
It always comes down to finances, but in some ways you look back and you're like, okay, maybe it's good that we did grow a little slower in some ways. I've had people that have left town and come back and been like, whoa, I can't believe how big this thing is now, and that actually just happened this past weekend. But the hardest really is finding the right people with the right mindset to really care for these kids. Not just a charity scene scenario where people show up at an event and they give, and that's fine too. I get that, because daily caring for these kids is not everybody's thing. But just to have a better understanding of what these kids, these human trafficking survivors that are in our care, to know why it just doesn't change like this overnight, getting the community to understand how tough it really is on these kids and how much trauma has affected their lives. That's still probably one of the hardest things to this day.
And what was it like going through COVID?
That was tough. I still feel like there's little things that survive as a result of COVID. Like there's little things I see and I'm like, oh, I remember when that happened during COVID. Um, we went through the '08 downturn because I've been here so long. So that was a tough scenario. And then COVID was just crazy, and it's like you didn't really know what was true or right. And these kids are not everything we do, but the kids that are under 18 in our care, they're in state custody. So you had the federal government and the state government kind of setting down their edicts as to what's okay, what's not. Then you got the school districts, and then you got just everybody else not knowing what was going on. It was a tough time for sure. And then financially, that was burdensome because everybody was scared. You're not going to give away a bunch of money if you don't know what's happening to your own finances. So it was a slower time, but I really feel like we survived that. God provided for us, and I feel like we could weather just about anything when it comes to that.
And how do kids find their way to Place of Hope?
So the ones that are under 18 for the foster care side of what we do, they all come de facto through the state of Florida. So the state's involved locally through this judicial circuit with Department of Children and Families, the court system, lawyers. They'll remove for imminent danger with, oftentimes with the police. And then what they'll do is the local agency that kind of spearheads placement, they'll call us and they say, and typically they know because we report back, we have 2 open beds in this home or whatever. We have 1. And so they just refer, and they refer from other counties as well, not just from here. So.
And you said you have 5 campuses now?
We do. Mm-hmm.
And how many kids do you house?
Our residential capacity is about 180. So it's quite a bit from a 24/7 perspective, but we're also in a massive campaign right now to raise enough money over the next few years to actually build out our campuses. So we always knew what we had, but we didn't actually have a concrete plan to get there and get done. And we only build debt free. We have no debt as an organization. So, we have to keep that in mind when we're trying to do what we're doing. But now we have this plan, and it's absolutely amazing because we're going to have hundreds more beds by the time we're done because we have the land. Unlike most charities, we own land that's buildable, and we're building.
So perfect segue. You're under a big fundraising campaign right now. Where can people find you?
placehope.com, and it's called God's Children, Our Future. And it's a comprehensive plan on the side of an annual fund, because obviously we have to pay our bills every month. That's why we do events and so forth, and people give. And the next is to build out the physical campuses debt free. So there's opportunities if people want to do that, and then in multiple locations. And then the third is to build an endowment for the future, because look, we're all going to be gone one day, and we're trying to build something super strong. This isn't just about us doing something nice for a little bit of time. We want this thing to last. My whole board is like that. All of our founders, I'm like that. My team's like that. So we want to build an endowment too, so that it's maybe a little bit of an easier sell one day when we all move out of the way, to get somebody in here with the right mindset to run a very healthy organization, which is what we have.
What were some of the pivotal moments that shaped Place of Hope's direction for growth?
Yeah, it's interesting. When we first opened and we had this one campus where I'm located now, the first one, there was a lot of fervor for let's build it all now. Let's raise the money and do it. And I had to temper the board even back then, just with my experience in homeless shelters and so forth, that this isn't something you grow fast. You have to really know what you're doing, and then you take it to the next level and the next level. So I think we've always had an entrepreneurial spirit, all of us, with the eye toward let's keep doing more, but not like overnight. Let's just do it as we feel it's appropriate. We can find the great people, because it's one thing to build housing. It's a whole nother to make sure we have the right staff. Because for the over 18ers, we don't just provide affordable housing. It's transitional affordable housing, when we have a lot of rules and a lot of programmatic pieces that you have to be a part of in order to have that housing. So we have to have people that are, kind of in their business and making sure that they're moving along. So.
And Place of Hope provides a range of services from family outreach and intervention and maternity care for young single mothers to safety, recovery, and restoration for human trafficking victims and survivors. Would you walk us through each of your various programs, how they came and how they've evolved over time?
Yeah, so the enrichment and education side sort of falls over everything that we do. I always call it like the non-organic family good stuff. It's the making sure that and the families do that, but just making sure that we have the outside resources to show the kids what's possible in their lives. And it could be job mentoring. It could be playing sports. It could be, we have the police that'll come in here and bring their dogs and their horses and show the kids that, we'll bring in therapy animals, whatever it is, that all falls under that. The affordable housing side really started transitional. when we realized we had kids that were in foster care that were going to start aging out of foster care. And then what do you do? Because all the stats show these kids don't make it. They end up incarcerated, and the females are pregnant right away, and it's just a big mess. And jails are full of kids that used to be in foster care, or close to the system at least. And so we just said we got to do it differently, and we have to have a place for them when they leave here. Again, with rules, it's the next level. It's a bridge. By the way, we have our sixth youth right now who is becoming a Habitat for Humanity homeowner. So that's the next layer after we've stabilized, maybe brought out of foster care, put them into transitional housing, and now all of a sudden they're owning a home. And so that's the ultimate. I love it. I want to do more and more of that. The human trafficking survivors, we've actually been doing that for over 20 years, taking care of them. It's just what before people started talking about human trafficking and all the the scourge that belongs to all that, and what people do to people for control and money. We just didn't know what we were dealing with. We were dealing with abused children that had really horrible things done to them. Once the country and other people woke up to, like, this is human trafficking, they just recodified everything. So we've got stories from 20 something years ago of just really bad stories of young people. But now what we've done is we've actually put some wraparound services and very specific therapy and targeted case management for those survivors, stuff they need because they've seen so much trauma in their lives, and all of it. So we have a maternity home for pregnant teenagers. We've seen 10 and 12-year-olds pregnant, rape victims, you name it, and they need a place to go. And most are in state custody. Some have just been referred to us over the years by families. And what we've done over the years is we've really just responded to needs as they pop up. And being entrepreneurial, this is one of the things I love the most that my board is in agreement with, and that is, just because you do something today in any business doesn't mean you're going to be in it forever. And charities have a real problem of getting out of their own way. They don't look from the business perspective a lot. And so I'm always looking at our numbers. I'm always looking at what's going on, but I'm also looking at how effective is something, because people in the community are giving me their money. Yeah, they trust me, but I got to keep we have to keep transparent on, are we having that big impact? And so sometimes we'll close out of things and go in a different direction just based on the community's need. But thankfully, we've been able to respond and just do more, not less.
Human trafficking has been an issue that was never on my radar until I started doing this podcast. And so now it's one of the biggest things that I focus on. And we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of a sting operation called March Sadness in South Florida, where 33 people were arrested, and it was teachers, clergy, sports coaches, everyone who you trust your kid with. Can you share some of the biggest misconceptions the public has about human trafficking?
For us, what I'd say that most people can't even imagine this is that most of the human trafficking that we see by definition is familial human trafficking. So you got a mom who is down on her luck financially, might have drug addiction or whatever, has deadbeat boyfriend in the house, and basically he's paying some of the bills and having sex with the daughter, and so that and she feels like things are taken care of. Well, that's disgusting, one, and two, it's highly illegal at the same time. So we see a lot of that. Now we do see, especially in the last couple of years, a lot of border crossing situations. So we have a lot of non-English speaking kids that come in, but they end up in the actual system. So they end up in foster care. So they might have come here with an adult or not, but they ended up in the system. We just see more that's more on the family end than gang stuff. Now, we have seen the gang stuff, and we've actually had some very high profile placements here over the years. I've had DCF secretaries themselves call me and say, we need you to give us a shot here because this girl's been in 50 foster placements. Can you try it? So we've had that as well. But yeah, it's really a sad scenario when you see what people do to children, what they do to other adults too, by the way, because when people have trauma in their lives, I always say I doubt there's anybody that walks the streets as a prostitute who wants to be a prostitute. Something happened in their lives and there's trauma involved. And so imagine these kids who've had this trauma. Sometimes it's not even ever brought forward. Nobody even knows about it. We've had plenty of kids placed here. HT is not codified in their file. It's supposed to be if they know, a human trafficking victim or survivor. We get them in here and then we find it out a year later. And it all comes out because they're stabilized. They feel safe and they feel like they can open up. But it's very, very common, and we see mainly in the familial side.
And one thing I like to highlight to our viewers and listeners is that people typically say, not in my neighborhood, not in my backyard. And we talked at the beginning of the show about the affluent communities that you're serving right now. I had a guest on about 2.5 years ago. She was trafficked by her best friend's dad throughout West Palm Beach. So you talk about the familiar thing, here's a 17, 18-year-old girl in high school who all the dads in the neighborhood in West Palm.
Mm.
And so it's disgusting. And that's why I appreciate folks like you and the work that you do. And that's why I, stand on the top of the mountain and scream for my lungs. Like, people need to open their eyes to this, because, and you mentioned, the border crossing, the cartels in Mexico and Latin America are sending them over, and that's it.
We got missing kids all over this country, and we do end up with some of them in care because when they do surface, the state takes them in and so forth. Thankfully, Florida's kind of ahead of the curve on that kind of thing legislatively, with some Florida laws, which is a good thing. It kind of identifies them a little bit differently and at least pulls them into the system. So we've gotten them where there's pimps involved, and then all of a sudden, because they're now legally in the system, the pimp disappears. So that's been good. But we've had families that gun runners and drug runners and all kinds of stuff, and then there's usually human trafficking tied to that as well. But unfortunately, we see the long-term effects, and it is not an easy scenario to get these kids toward healing. But it is possible.
You work in so many challenging areas of human needs. Which one is the most challenging? Or do they all fall in the category of most challenging?
I mean, excuse me. It's all challenging because you just don't really know who's coming into your residential until they do, right? But I'm also a big believer that even if through an outreach program where we might just be providing someone with diapers and clothing, I'm like a part of me that really wants people to understand that you got to show, you have to show some gratitude in life, we're surrounded by people who just think everything, they deserve everything. And it's not true. No, nobody should walk through life like that. I'm not trying to say that I know what they've walked through. But at the same time, we try to do a lot of teaching in our model that, hey, these are people that don't even know you, that have given because they understand your plight and they want to make life better for you. So I make that a part of it because I feel like otherwise we're just handing stuff out. But yeah, it is. Yeah, there's a lot to that. But
how do you measure the long-term success of your programs?
Honestly, the number one thing, because I've thankfully being mainly private funded, I've never felt like we had to get into all these, consultants coming in and building this, that, and the other. And my thing is, we have a lot of kids who come back after they turn 18. They might move away. They might move into our housing. They might go somewhere else. They might get married. They might have their own children. They come back. So a lot of them will tell their story. They'll speak at our events. You can't make people do that. That's because they want to do that and they really feel like they've been impacted. We have a young lady right now who's going out in our quarterly or our annual direct mail piece that she was here years ago, and she kind of resurfaced and she's around. She's doing great. A lot of trauma. It's a bad situation, very bad. But she stepped up and said, "I want to do this. I want to be a part of this." And what she wrote out for our donors to hear is it's just spectacular. It's unbelievable. So that's kind of one of those things that really keeps you going, knowing that they do have that resilience and they can heal up, and she's doing great. So
well, and to your point, it's those personal stories that really put a spotlight on it in terms of what we're doing does work, and your dollars make a difference.
Yeah. And so if I can tell those stories or they can tell their stories, for me, that's enough. Obviously we look at other stats as well. We have funders that want to know certain things, but we look at their grades. We definitely look at how they doing in school, how they doing in their social relations, how are they doing? We get kids in here that have never once been to a dentist and they might be 15 years old. So you got to look at the simplest of things. We have kids that have come in here. I'm not exaggerating. These kids have gone off and been star college athletes, but they never even picked up a ball before they got here. So just to show you that they've got these skills and they're resilient, and you just got to tap into it, and so to me, that's some of the ways we measure it, through the simplest of ways. So.
And what distinguishes Place of Hope from other social services organizations in your part of Florida?
I definitely, like I said, I like to remain entrepreneurial. First, I'd be bored out of my skull if I was just always running the same thing. And so it's not even just about expansion. It's really just being about critically looking at everything that you're in and you're doing, and what's the impact, and can you do it less expensively and serve more people and still have the greatest impact. I just like all those pieces, organizational structure, bringing in the right people. And honestly, I love to be in the realm of fundraising, not for the purpose of raising money, but more for purpose of meeting great people who have a kindred spirit in the sense that they want to be a part of something. They want to co-own it. That's my favorite thing by far. I love seeing the kids. I love hanging out with them, but I love that part as well, because we're just surrounded by great people. And you're doing this for us today. I love that because you're helping us tell the story, and you have an audience that gets to hear, what's going on, especially for those that don't understand it. So.
Are there any specific stories you'd like to share about a child or family?
There's a ton. I mean, even the young lady I just mentioned to you that's coming back now, and she's living in our affordable housing. But all the kids that have gone on to, get college degrees or get tech degrees, in air conditioning or electrical. There's a lot of them, but we have, a young man that was at our Hope Bash big dinner this weekend at Trump Jupiter. Hundreds of people in the room, and his family. We presented them an award, and they adopted him after he turned 18. So they wanted that just to show him that he's forever part of that family. And that kid was there with a big smile on his face. He works here now. We have several young people that work for us, and we've had a lot over the years. Again, just seeing them with their resilience, even when there's high levels of trauma, just seeing them make it. And look, I've always said, people say, well, how do you spell success? I mean, honestly, with the kids we're dealing with and the stats that surround them in their lives, honestly, if some of these kids, if we can keep them from hurting or killing somebody based on what they've been through, we all win. So it's not all, hey, I got a degree at University of Florida or whatever. It's all of it, but some of it's just getting these kids to kind of take a deep look inside and try to move toward healing, and know that they're loved, because we really do love them.
You mentioned that you're mostly privately funded. We don't talk much about politics on here for various reasons, well, for obvious reasons, I should say. But given the current administration and what Elon Musk is doing, is there any concern from a federal budget perspective?
No, I'm not concerned, because a lot of what comes down from federal HHS that goes to, I guess it's kind of block granted to states. It's based on some formula of need, which changes all the time. But usually the legislatures have to match it at least at 50%. What could happen is you could see, because you can't not you cannot not take kids in if they need to have safety, right? If they're in imminent danger, they have to be removed. Now, I have seen them where they move the bar of what's acceptable. I've seen it over 20 something years. It's terrible. But like, I'll look and say, well, 2 years ago, they would have removed that kid, and now they haven't. And look what's happened, so they will play around a little bit. But overall, I think, they're going to have to fund at least partially what the need is. What I like is we've built an organization. There are a lot of groups like us out there that are, they could be 85% government finance. You should never have that in any kind of charity, if you ask me, because all it takes is one switch and you're closing your doors. And so we're somewhere down at like 32% right now, with government funds. And so I like it that way, and that's not gonna impact us. And we just have generous donors, and like I said, we're trying to build an endowment to hedge against some of those things as well, because that day may come, and this. I mean, I guess it could have an impact. I just don't think it's going to hit us real hard.
And from your perspective, what would be the long-term consequences of reducing social programs and low-income housing initiatives on communities like those of Places of Hope?
Just tell me that one more time.
What do you think the long-term consequences of reducing social programs and low-income housing initiatives, how would affect you?
Well, it's definitely not happening in Florida right now. South Florida. Everybody's talking about affordable housing and the crisis and the need. Now, when we talk about it, we always say that it's affordable transitional, because what we don't need is a lineup of people saying, I want affordable housing, because ours is a program. But if you think about it, ours is of the greatest need, because we have the young people who are slipping through the cracks otherwise, that have been through these traumatic life experiences. I would say there's more of a need for what we do, but there's also just a need for truly affordable housing. I mean, people are being squashed out of here. I mean, my own children are having, one owns and two are trying to own homes, and it's tough right now. I mean, in the same areas that were almost affordable not that long ago. So that affects everybody, but I think it really affects young people who have been through the system and traumatized and or homeless and those kinds of things. And so we're kind of addressing as much as we can at that level, but just the general workforce population needs some help. So I hope to see it keep going in a good direction.
The work that you do exacts such a heavy emotional and physical toll. Have you ever had a time when you were ready to just throw your hands up in the air and walk away?
I have such a great team, and I have a clinical director and a COO that they've both been with me over 20 years, and they're on the front line of dealing with a lot of that stuff, and I'm aware of everything that's going on, and it is tough on the team from time to time, especially our foster families. I mean, they are on the front line, and then even with those that help run our transitional housing, not every young person is showing a lot of gratitude for what they're having handed to them and so forth, and so the team struggles with that at times. But at times, I've never once felt like I wanted to throw up my hands. I've had some tough days. And there were, probably a couple times over the years that I've looked at opportunities that have come my way to do something different. And each of those times I walked away from it feeling like I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Like I said, it's tough, but I love it at the same time.
Well, I guess to that point, what's the most rewarding part of your job?
I think it's two things. I think it really is seeing these young kids that have gone through so much be resilient, learn to show gratitude, learn to actually become self-sustaining. And then the flip side over here is bringing in those people that can afford to help us do those things. Like they're giving their time, whatever they give, and just and they could be doing diaper drives for us, or they could be giving money that they did kids, raising money through a lemonade stand. It could be with all that. That's probably my second favorite part, where I just love to see the community get together and want to make something great happen. So it's probably those two things.
How do you stay motivated and avoid burning out? I mean, you see such traumatic life experiences. I mean, that's got to take its toll on you.
I get woken up a lot in the middle of the night, so I spend a lot of time in prayer. I really do, because I just think that's the number one thing. I mean, I really feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be, and I also feel like if God's called us to something, He's gonna provide for it. And I know that might sound overly simplistic, but it's the truth. And thankfully also, I've had the team that I have around me for so long, even my board members that have just been so long term and all in, and we're super transparent. We've taken over 2 charities that failed, and in both circumstances there were problems with the board of directors and the leadership, and they were fighting with each other. And we don't have that. We don't do that, because we're open with each other about everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. I tell the board everything. They get involved where they need to. And so because of those strong characters around us on the team, as well as the board and the volunteers, just keeps me motivated. Yeah. I do like to go to the Keys every once in a while and veg out, but
As someone who lives in Connecticut, I'm a little jealous of that. So I appreciate you sharing that. You've mentioned the word resilient a few times in our conversation. What's the most important lesson you've learned about resilience through your years of work?
I mean, honestly, seeing some of these kids that, there's just so many stories I could describe to you, but some of the ones that I guess sort of bother me the most is when you've seen like a lot of bullying with kids who maybe are in foster care, and maybe they don't look quite like the kids around them in certain circumstances. And to see those kids get bullied, boy, there's a part of me that wants to just come out of my skin on that. But obviously I'm an adult, I can't do that. But that's hard to watch at times. And then sometimes, looking back at, like, you have families who probably were healthy enough to do something in their case to get their child back, and just decided to put themselves first and not do it. And to see what a kid goes through in that is really hard to ever get used to. It's one thing if mom's completely drugged out and you haven't seen her, she doesn't show up for her case, for reviews or her visitations, any of that. But when one is kind of there and then just decides, I'd rather go smoke some weed or crack or whatever, and then doesn't show up, and you see this kid just melt, that's hard. And I don't know if I answered your question correctly,
No,
but it's just
you did.
those kinds of things that you just never get used to.
No, I totally understand that. That's just awful to think about as a parent.
It is.
Place of Hope and other organizations are performing triage on people who are already injured. Where do we need to be investing time, money, and other resources to prevent the people you serve from being injured in the first place?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We're not, as an organization, in the super front side of the system where there's shaky family situations and we've been asked to come in with services. We just haven't been asked to do that. We are on the next level, where in the United States, a lot of kids that are removed for imminent danger, instead of going into licensed foster homes, they go with relatives. They call it relative, non-relative caregiving. There's a lot of that. And so it's somewhat formal, but not as much. But a lot of those families don't have the resources that they need as well. It's just somebody doing a good thing. It's grandma. Like, I'm not going to let my kids and my grandkids go into foster care. So they step up. So one of the things we've done about that to kind of address that and do something big, is help those folks, is to step up with diapers and car seats and cribs and everything they would need to receive that child that they really want to receive. That's one of the things we've launched into, that we're really grateful to be a part of that, and we're serving thousands too. This happens to a lot of people, so, and they just need some help to make it happen and make it work and keep those kids safe.
It's no secret that the foster care system has its shortcomings. Mm-hmm. What systemic changes would you like to see in the system to better support children?
Yeah, I think that it's like everything else. Things get political from time to time. So you got this group that thinks, oh, hey, residential care is bad, or you have these people that say, well, traditional foster care is bad. And by the way, nothing's perfect, right? So bad things happen. One of the things we see is that the insurance industry, that we have no choice but to have a lot of insurance, doesn't line up with the priorities of the child welfare system, and the child welfare system's not watching what the insurance industry is doing. So we're caught in this vortex in between of like, no, we have to do it this way, but you guys don't want to insure it, or vice versa. I'd love to see some of that stuff straightened out. I'd also love to see some of the politics of how the system. There's a lot of people that don't believe you should ever remove a child. I totally disagree with that. I get what they're trying to say. I get that there's a tremendous upside to keep families together if you can, but there's been a lot of bad stories where that hasn't worked out, and it's the child that gets hurt the worst, or worse. And so I'd love to see the politics get out of that, and I'd also love to see some things where people just agree, whether it's legislatively or whatever. There's something happening in Florida right now with a possible bill in rural communities to do a certain level of care. It's very similar to ours, and I may go up and speak to this issue with the Senate. And that is that, put the politics aside. If a model works and it's good for these kids, let's just try it. Let's do it. Let's get the private sector involved. So more encouraging in the private sector. I'm a big believer in that.
You and me both. When you sit down with the policymakers, like you're talking about, what's your message to them?
Yeah, I mean, results. I want them to, oftentimes I'll bring kids along, or they'll already know them. A lot of the folks that are elected down here know us and know us well. And also, I've got some guys that were tremendous marketers in their past careers and so forth. And they remind you always tell the really good business parts. Like we have the highest ratings from Charity Navigator and Candid, so, and when we go and ask for something, we typically match it dollar for dollar. So we're not just going, oh, we need money. We'll say, if you will give us this, we will go to these folks to give us this, or vice versa. So we look at everything more like a partnership as opposed to give. And I think legislators and just people in decision-making sides of things have a real hard time just constantly just forking it over. You gotta do your part, and so I'm a big believer if a foundation wants to give me money, but they've got a couple strings attached to it, like, hey, we want you over here in our golf tournament. Okay, then I'm going to go find some guys to play golf in your tournament. It's just simple stuff like that I think shows that it's not just us going like this, but it's all of us in this thing together. So.
If you had unlimited resources, or even better yet, if you were king for a day, what changes would you make in government policy, laws, or investments on the way society operates?
Wow. Yeah, I do believe in like what you talked about. I mean, when you look at the amount of waste in our country, especially at the federal government level, and now I know there's a lot of states starting to look at themselves even a little bit differently now because of what you mentioned has happened at the federal level. I think, if we can send gazillions of dollars overseas like it's nothing, I think we could do a little bit more investing in the side of the system that you just mentioned. Like when families are really starting to have some rough times, they shouldn't have to pay $250 for therapy. And by the way, they just don't go, or, the system comes around and creates some substandard, subpar system to provide this kind of stuff for them. And there's no healing in that. It's not good enough. So why don't we just scrap that whole thing and say, and I don't mean forever, hand up, not hand out. This idea that you wrap around these folks when things are starting to get shaky, and just try to keep the family together, because look, I'd like to see no kids in foster care too, but for the right reasons and the right way.
When you're talking a few minutes ago about like the grandmother taking in the grandchild, and you would give them cribs and diapers, that exact phrase was in my head: is give them a hand up, not a hand out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's words to live by,
because they're already stepping up to do a very tough thing. Imagine getting that call at midnight. Oh, we got your grandkids, and they're will you take them? Yeah, of course, but it's going to be tough. It's going to change my life overnight, and a lot of the people they just need the help financially too.
And you somewhat answered this, but how do you inspire others, whether it's colleagues, donors, or volunteers, for folks to get involved and stay involved?
That's a great question. On the donor side, we definitely pride ourselves in the fact that we have a lot of long-term donors. We have a lot of people that have been with us years. I mean, my board chair alone has been with me as board chair for more than 20 years. I've got board members, others that have been since the founding. So even with donors, again, like I said, speaking to them about things that matter in everyday business, like we're debt-free. We're not going to go crashing down after you make an investment here. We've done something like 45 capital campaigns already. So, in a lot of charities, they mess up in capital campaigns. They raise money and they don't get the job done, and all that money gets squandered, and people are weary about that. Well, I can take them all around and say, no. here's one we did, here's one we did. By the way, we've done like 45 of them. We would never do that. In fact, we won't even start typically building until we're 80 to 85% funded. So maybe we could be in a position to have to short-term borrow something, but it's a good, healthy borrow. But we can point to those things for people. And so that's one of the ways we definitely encourage, and just letting them know the results too. When they see the young people around and they see the pictures in our collaterals, they know it's real deal and it's local too.
What's next for Place of Hope?
So this campaign we're in is really to build out our current footprint. We're doing a lot more in the anti-human trafficking space on the educational side as well, and also doing some. I'm just a big believer in the right kind of collaborations. So, for instance, we're dealing with a company right now that's building an app. Excuse me, sorry. Building an app, and it's going to be a way to teach parents about what their kids are looking at on their cell phones, on these egregious apps that are out there, and these things that are working against their children. A lot of kids are falling into sextortion, where they're convinced, as you know, to send pictures of themselves, and then all of a sudden you find out that these are gangs from like Nigeria and stuff that do this stuff. But people get scared and freaked out, they send more, and then all of a sudden you're in a firestorm. Well, if kids better understood what they're about to enter into, and older, their parents as well, that's one level. We're doing another thing with a statewide Florida fund, where we're working with the Florida Sheriff's Association all over on some of these busts, like the one you mentioned earlier. We have a lot of them in the center of the state too, in Polk County and Orange County. And what we're doing is we're saying to them, if there's a bust, we're this fund that we're a part of as well, we'll actually reimburse some of the police organizations for the money they put out in order to stage a sting, because otherwise sometimes they won't stage the sting because they don't have the money. Or if they get people, the survivors in, they don't have the money to put them in the places that they need to be. And so we're part of that as well. And then we're part of Crime Stoppers throughout Florida right now, where we have our group. One of my board members in particular has provided some of the money to up the amount of reward for tips, bona fide tips, but specific to human trafficking, which was all new. We started that with them about a year and a half ago. So just doing a lot more that way, but on the residential, just building out the footprint we have from Martin down to Boca.
Now, you just mentioned sextortion, and that's something that a lot of folks also don't think about or don't know about. And literally just yesterday I was reading an article about that, and I think there were 17 kids that they highlighted who committed suicide because of that. And so that's a big deal that parents need to just to be aware of, to your point about seeing what's on their phone and what's happening.
Yeah, and this collective app that we're a part of with this group, really brilliant people that put this thing together here in West Palm. It's a way to just give tools to these families, and it's actually a collection of people who can communicate with each other. Hey, my son got this strange text, anybody know about this? Or I found this app on my son's phone, or this is happening, what do I do now? And so it's they're learning from each other, but then they also have the professionals that have created the app to provide insight, and it's really kind of a neat thing. But yeah, the more we can, I don't want to just say it's all about just educating people that this happens, because there's a lot of groups out there doing that. And we do some of that as well in schools and so forth, but really getting down into the nitty gritty about here's what it really looks like. It's not always the white van that pulls up and snatches your kid. It's the white van that happened to come up, but he's been talking to your kid on the internet, for 6 weeks or whatever. So kind of scary stuff. And I think the more people know, the more vigilant they'll be.
Charles, we've got about 90 seconds left. Any parting words of wisdom?
Well, thank you for highlighting what we do, and for your people that follow you. Appreciate that very much. Like I said earlier on, it's a lot of people just don't know the depth of it, especially when it comes to trafficking, and again, just the results of trauma and trafficking, and getting people to understand that there is a way to get these kids and young people toward healing. But if we don't stop these cycles, we're going to have the same problems forever. I think the Bible says there's always going to be people in poverty. We get that, but some of this other stuff we could cut out. I really think we could, but it's all about, you got to raise the funds to do it. You got to put something good together, and then you got to get people to listen, and I think people are starting to listen. I think people are scared of what's out there. We see some crazy stuff, that's for sure.
And you're at the front lines, and so thank you for the work that you do.
Well, thank you as well. Appreciate you. It's great to meet you.
Likewise. Charles Bender, founding CEO of Place of Hope. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm Chris Meek. We're out of time. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.